And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he hopes for a ceasefire with Russia starting on Monday, adding that he will be waiting for Putin in Turkiye, referring to the Russian president's offer for direct peace talks in Istanbul. Zelenskyy said Ukraine's proposal of a ceasefire starting today remained on the table. Early on Sunday, he insisted that there must be a full temporary ceasefire in place before the negotiations proposed by Putin could start. Vladimir Putin has rejected the ceasefire offer and instead proposed restarting direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul. Also, United States President Donald Trump posted on his social media page that President Putin doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate a possible end to the bloodbath, adding that saying Ukraine should agree immediately. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which began in February 2022, has killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers and triggered the gravest confrontation between Russia and the West since 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. In the first weeks of the conflict, Russian and Ukrainian negotiators held direct talks in Istanbul, but failed to agree to halt the fighting. Let's bring in global affairs analyst Jide Ojo. Dr. Ojo, thanks for joining us on The World Now. President Zelenskyy, we understand, is pushing for a truce and a potential meeting with his Russian counterpart in Turkiye. Do you consider these a chance for success?
Thank you, Nifemi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a chance for success. The last time the two leaders have met face-to-face was in March of 2022, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. And since that time, it's been 3 years plus now, nothing has happened in terms of a truce or ceasefire for 3 years plus. And as you said in that background, there are hundreds of thousands of people have died. Property worth trillions of dollars have been leveled. And, trauma of war, even if the war ends today, the trauma alone would take decades to heal. And it's better to judge than to war. So rather than talking through proxies, through ministers of foreign affairs, it's better that the two leaders, have a tete-a-tete on Thursday in Turkey. And I'm happy that pressure is mounting on Putin to have this meeting. The US, the European Union, the UK, all are pushing and pressuring Putin to have this director, which hopefully should lead to a ceasefire and ultimately cessation of hostilities between the two countries.
Absolutely. I can imagine how awkward that meeting will be between both men who probably haven't met in person, in the past 3 years. But with Ukraine still demanding territorial sovereignty and Russia insisting on its gains, what compromises, if any, could realistically lead to a ceasefire at this stage?
Sincerely speaking, I think Ukraine is at the receiving end and may eventually have to be forced to cede about 20% of its land, as it were. The 20% are the areas under the control of Russia. Because Zelensky's hand is weakened by the fact that US is not ready to pump more resources, artilleries and funds to support its defense against Ukraine, against Russia. And you recall that under Joe Biden, every time that Zelenskyy goes to Washington, he comes back with billions of dollars in commitments, military support, funds, and all of that. But since Donald Trump took charge on January 20, he has made it very clear that there should be no more, or there would be no more grants to Russia. In fact, to Ukraine. In fact, you will see that they just had a mineral resource deal where U.S. is hoping to recoup all its investments in Ukraine through the exploration of valuable mineral resources in Ukraine. So it's better for Zelensky to cut his loss. Perhaps he could be lucky if not up to 20% of his country is ceded to Russia. And you know that Putin has also called for disarmament of Ukraine, that the Western world, European Union, America, you should stop funding and, supporting Zelensky with arms and ammunition. But if that happens, then that would be a walkover for Russia. So in order to avoid a stalemate, I think mediators will do well to have a win-win situation options that will make sure that both sides do not lose face in this intractable and lingering warfare.
But what do you think that means for Zelensky's allies in the West, who probably would want him to, who favor a stronger stance against Russia? What does this talk mean for that relationship with the West?
Realistically, those countries, those European countries, much as they are afraid that if Russia wins in Ukraine, Putin could possibly move on to Poland, to other countries in Europe, and that will spell doom for European Union. I know that that's their greatest fear. It's not so much about the fact that they love Zelensky, but at least fighting the war on the soil of Ukraine helps to stall any further advancement of Russia towards the rest of Europe. And that's why they have continually pledged support to Zelensky. But the reality that stars everybody in the eye is that many of these European countries are themselves facing economic crisis. You just saw what the polls look like in Germany, where the Olaf shows lost to the opposition, arising from rising cost of living and economic crisis. And that's the story with many of the European Union. You also recall that the election won by Keir Starmer in UK was as a result of the economic woes and challenges that UK also faced. So with all these countries facing internal economic crisis, they cannot continually support Zelensky to continue to war, because at the end of the day, it's the Ukrainians that are getting killed. Though I admit that there are also casualties on the side of Russia as well as North Korea that have drafted some thousands of men to support Putin in the war against Ukraine. But by and large, it's still better to war than to judge war. So I think the reality is there must be concession on both parts, because as I've spoken to, the economic crisis many European countries are facing, America is facing its own economic crisis. You could see the trade war between America and many other countries, China, India, and the rest of them. So it's all about everybody for himself, God for us all. So at the end of the day, the reality that stars Zelensky on the face is that he has no resources to prosecute this war on his own. Is relying on pledges and commitment and support from the Western world. And if this funding support dries up, it will lose face, because Russia will just run over Kiev and the entire Ukraine. So it's better to cut its loss at this point, agree to some to lose some of his some part of his country, and while he defends the rest, hoping that he will get resources to rebuild the country. Because even if the war stops today, there will still be need for billions of dollars to rebuild Ukraine that have suffered the gargantuan losses in the last 3.5 years.
Dr. Joe, good place to leave it. All eyes on Ankara to see how this meeting pans out and what it means for ceasefire in the region. Global Affairs Analyst Dr. Joe, thank you for talking to us.
Enjoy the rest of your week, Nifemi, and stay blessed.